They call it pink gold. Potash is a vital ingredient for growing food and Canada's production volume. It's now being touted as a secret weapon in this trade war with the United States. The countdown is on. Canada and the United States are deep in trade talks, facing a hard deadline, August 1st. If no deal is reached, President Trump has vowed to impose a sweeping 35% tariff on Canadian imports. It's not just a threat, it's already been formalized in writing. Behind closed doors, Prime Minister Mark Carney is walking a tightrope. On one side, Canada's economy is still heavily tied to the AS market. On the other, a AS president who's turned tariffs into a political weapon. Carney's strategy has been quiet but deliberate. He's paused Canada's digital services tax, offered symbolic defense cooperation through the AS Missile Shield program, and tried to avoid any public confrontation. But now many in Canada believe that's not enough. They say it's time to put real pressure on Trump. And one word keeps coming up: potash. Gulf Islands Member of Parliament Elizabeth May is calling on Carney to continue collecting the digital sales tax. She's also pitching stopping the $4.9 billion exportation of Canadian potash, a key ingredient for fertilizer, to American farmers. Potash is a key ingredient in fertilizer. Without it, global food production would shrink dramatically. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, over 50% of the world's food supply depends on fertilizers, and potash provides the potassium that makes them effective. Canada holds the largest reserves of potash on the planet, with most production centered in Saskatchewan. The United States, by contrast, produced only around 400,000 metric tons of potash in 2023, while consuming more than 5.3 million tons. The numbers speak for themselves. The AS depends on Canadian potash, and that makes it different from other traded goods. Cars, aluminum, even semiconductors can be sourced elsewhere. But with Russia and Belarus, the two other major global suppliers, facing sanctions or instability, Canada is essentially the only reliable source left. Any disruption could push fertilizer prices up, and with it, the cost of food across North America. That's why some Canadian leaders are calling for action. They want the federal government to put potash on the negotiating table, not just as a commodity, but as a bargaining chip. One proposal includes halting the $4.9 billion in potash exports to the AS entirely. Another suggests creating a national strategic reserve supported by public investment through bonds, an idea proposed by Canada's Parliamentary Budget Office during the 2025 federal election. Their logic is simple: if Trump is using pain as leverage, Canada should do the same. And if that pain touches us farmers, one of Trump's most loyal constituencies, it may force a recalibration in Washington. But the simple logic is that if the price of fertilizer goes up that much, food prices, everything goes up. And yes, it's food. There's a risk in weaponizing potash. It's not just another industrial input. It's tied directly to food supply, inflation, and food security. Disrupting potash shipments could hurt not only us farmers, but ripple through the global economy. Industry leaders in Saskatchewan warned that tariffs and trade barriers on potash are different. Unlike cars or steel, potash is not optional. It's essential. That's why some argue Canada doesn't need to issue threats. The numbers alone, the dependency, the market imbalance are powerful enough. The mere possibility of disruption may be all the leverage Canada needs. Trump thrives on confrontation. He pushes hard, expecting others to blink. But this time, he may have met a different kind of resistance. Not loud, not angry, but strategic. Potash isn't just Canada's economic strength. It's America's agricultural lifeline. Whether Canada uses it openly or quietly, it may be the one card strong enough to bring Trump back to the table. Not with bluster, but with a deal. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says a proposal for a new oil pipeline in Canada is highly likely. Look, the bottom line is a new east-west coast pipeline in Canada is good for Canadians. It's good for world markets in that we have access to more supply, but for the first time, Canadian liquefied natural gas is heading overseas. As President Trump ramps up tariffs against Canada, Ottawa is responding not with speeches or countermeasures, but with something far more strategic. For the first time, Canadian liquefied natural gas is being shipped directly to Asia, bypassing the United States entirely. At the same time, a new cross-country pipeline is being fast-tracked. It's not retaliation. It's leverage, and it could reshape the balance of power in North America's energy and trade relationship. In early July, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney confirmed what many had suspected. Canada is moving ahead with a proposed pipeline connecting Alberta's oil fields to the Pacific coast. This east-west pipeline would allow Canadian oil to bypass American refineries entirely, a strategic shift at a time when US tariffs are rising. According to former Energy Secretary Dan Brouillette, Canada's push is more than economic. It's political. With American refiners buying most of Canada's oil, the country has long been boxed in. This pipeline could change that. But oil isn't the only focus. In British Columbia, LNG Canada has now shipped its first cargo of liquefied natural gas to North Asia. The $40 billion project, the largest private investment in Canadian history, has capacity for 14 million tonnes annually, and it could double. Suddenly, Canada is no longer just exporting energy to the United States. It's entering the global market. Well, as you know, it addresses two key priorities for the current government. One, trade diversification, which is the new mantra in response to Trump's tariffs. It fits into that. It also fits into the other objective of Canada becoming an energy superpower. Why does this matter now? Because nearly 97% of Canada's oil and gas exports still go to the US. That's been a long-standing vulnerability. It means lower prices, less production, and no access to rising demand overseas. But LNG is shifting that. Asia now accounts for over 70% of global LNG demand. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and China are looking to cut coal use and need reliable natural gas. Canada, with its Pacific coastline, has a key advantage. A tanker from British Columbia reaches Asia in half the time it takes from the US Gulf Coast. That means Canada can compete and win. If this shift continues, Canada could significantly reduce its reliance on American buyers. And in a trade negotiation, that matters. It changes the power dynamic because if Trump continues to use tariffs as pressure, Canada now has an option: redirect supply away from the US, not just in theory, but in real volume. This is no longer a bluff. It's infrastructure in motion. The North Asia story comes as Canada looks to diversify its trading relationships outside of the US. The United States might be the world's top oil producer with a record 13.44 million barrels per day in July 2025, according to the Energy Information Administration. But production is only one part of the equation. Delivery is another. America still faces challenges building the pipeline capacity needed to move that oil. It also relies heavily on stable imports from Canada to balance refining needs, especially in the Midwest and Northeast. If Canada cuts or diverts supply, as refiners could face higher costs. Consumers could see higher fuel prices. Even more, industries tied to energy, like electric vehicles, heavy manufacturing, and construction, could feel the pressure. Canada's new LNG routes, if fully scaled, could also undercut future export ambitions. While the Trump administration promotes its own Alaska LNG project, it's years behind. By the time American gas reaches Asia, Canadian cargo may already be there. Trump's tariffs were meant to corner Canada, but they may have pushed it to finally break free. Pipelines and LNG terminals don't respond to tweets. They reshape long-term leverage. And this time, it's Canada laying down the infrastructure, not just the rhetoric. As natural gas flows westward and oil bypasses old routes, the question isn't whether Trump will escalate. It's whether the US is ready for a trade war where energy is the counterpunch. That Canada's new government will do several things. First, we will take a series of measures to stabilize our domestic steel market and prevent harmful trade diversion arising from current trade tensions. When President Trump raised tariffs to 50% on Canadian steel in early June, the blow was immediate. Within days, exports collapsed, jobs were cut, and one of Canada's most tightly integrated cross-border industries found itself severed from its biggest customer. This week, Prime Minister Mark Carney finally responded, not with threats or retaliation, but with something more calculated, a structural shift, one designed not just to react, but to rebuild. The trade actions of the United States are further transforming global steel market dynamics and supply chains. Let's be clear, Canada will be one of the countries most impacted by these developments. The plan starts with a clear message. Canada will no longer be the world's most open steel market. For decades, nearly 2/3 of Canada's steel consumption has come from imports, while over 90% of its steel exports flowed south to the United States. Now, that equation is being rewritten. By the end of this month, Canada will implement strict tariff rate quotas. For countries without a free trade agreement, imports will be capped at 50% of their 2024 volumes. Anything above that will face a 50% tariff. For FTA partners, the cap is 100, with the same 50% penalty beyond the threshold. A second, more targeted measure aims directly at Chinese origin steel. Any product containing steel melted and poured in China, regardless of where it's finished, will face additional tariffs, with one exception. As steel remains untouched under existing COSMA terms. This isn't retaliation. It's insulation. So moving forward, we must diversify our trade relationships, and above all, we must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects, rather than escalate tensions. Carney is using this moment to reorient the domestic market. That means investing, not just protecting. The federal government will inject $1 billion through the Strategic Innovation Fund. This money is earmarked for Canadian steel producers to modernize equipment, produce higher-value products, and fill the gaps left by lost as contracts. To support workers directly, $70 million will be funneled through labor market development agreements covering training and income assistance for up to 10,000 steel employees. An additional $150 million in regional support will be prioritized for steel-producing communities, alongside expanded loan access for mid-sized firms, lowering entry requirements, cutting interest rates, and extending loan terms from 5 to 7 years. But perhaps the most transformative change is in federal procurement. Going forward, government contractors will be required to use Canadian steel in major infrastructure, housing, and defense projects. From shipyards to bridges, the steel that builds Canada will now come from within. All of this unfolds in the shadow of Trump's tariff threats. Canada's position is precarious. A 35% blanket tariff on all Canadian goods is scheduled to begin August 1st, unless a bilateral deal is reached first. And yet, Ottawa has not retaliated. Instead, it's holding the door open, keeping tariffs off of steel for now while maintaining strategic leverage elsewhere. Digital services taxes have been paused. Canada has engaged in fentanyl coordination. Every move is part of a broader strategy to stay at the table without appearing weak, though the Prime Minister has acknowledged that no country has secured a deal with the US free of tariffs under this administration. His approach suggests a pivot. The focus now is not on removing tariffs entirely, but shaping where and how they apply. The likely target is a reduced selective rate of 8% to 10% instead of 35%, with carve-outs for essential sectors like autos, energy, and metals. We will continue to do business with the US for the rest of the year, but we will also work with new partners or partners that we have not developed commercial relationships as deep as the US one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries. Canada isn't just responding to a crisis, it's laying the foundation for a more self-reliant economy, one where steel is not just exported, but embedded in national development. This shift won't bring back every job. It won't reverse every lost shipment, but it offers breathing room and a pathway forward, whether or not a deal is reached by August. One saying, Canada has already begun to decouple its industrial future from Trump's unpredictability and place it firmly in Canadian hands.